Hello guys, my name's Ping Yao and a very warm welcome to my channel and to a brand new one-off episode. This is going to be fun. I have been commissioned by thePhoenician, who is a fellow YouTuber, City Skylines city builder, to work on a project for his Berlin Noir series. Now, if you're not familiar with thePhoenician, then he does do a lot of detailed work like I do, and his current series called Berlin Noir is probably one of the most original YouTube series at the moment out there for City Skylines, and it's a really unique build that he's undertaken. Basically, he's working on a kind of replica of Berlin from around about 1929, so just on the cusp of 1930, that sort of period. Now, I don't know too much about that period of German history. thePhoenician's obviously got a bit of a historical interest in that period, but it is in between the First World War and obviously the Second World War. And in many respects, it's almost one of the kind of the heyday for Berlin in many respects. It was when Berlin was really one of the most sort of exciting sort of cities certainly in Europe, and he's focusing in on a lot of the kind of architecture of course, and just the sort of whole historical vibe of Berlin from that era, and he's doing it really well. If you watch his videos, they are particularly detailed, and he does spend a lot of time giving a lot of thought to how the city how it looks and making sure it looks correct to the historical period of the day. And obviously, being 1920s or 1929, it comes with its own issues, and one of those issues is finding props and assets that work to the kind of era of the day. Now, he asked me because he'd seen, I believe, my Railyard project for one of my cities, Santa Caprizia, and he wondered if I'd be interested in doing a Railyard for his Berlin Noir series. So of course I jumped at the chance, the opportunity to do a historical build, because I've never done one, or certainly not a historical build before. And this area that he's then supplied me is of course where the Railyard will be located. Now, the only real brief was that there was a few rail connections at the top and the bottom of the map, and other than that, his brief was pretty flexible. So in a way, that makes it easier because it gives you a blank canvas to work from. But then at the same time, I didn't want to necessarily build something that didn't look right or just didn't fit with the rest of his build. So I was very aware that whatever I built here needed to relate to the sort of 1920s vibe. So I spent a little time, first of all, just collecting a few assets, trying to find some on his own collection, and just making sure that the assets I was using would fit with the theme. And then it was a question of working out what I was going to do with the Railyard. Now, the first thing to say in regards to this build is the train tracks that I laid down initially, I decided to change kind of halfway through. And the reason for that is those train tracks, they use a timber sleeper. But the problem with a wooden sleeper is, or certainly with the dirt, is that the rail line almost disappears into the ground. You can't really see it very clearly. So later on, you'll see that I decide to actually revert back to a concrete sleeper, which means that although from a historical accuracy point of view it might not be necessarily correct, I think visually it looks a little bit better because the rail lines, well, you can actually see them on the map, whereas at the moment they kind of just disappear. So that was the first thing. And also the other thing with the timber sleeper, for some reason I couldn't get the tracks to sit on the ground properly. They kept making a kind of ditch around them, like a kind of depression all around them. And even if I'm plopping them straight onto the ground, making sure that the bridge tool was inactivated, making sure it was, you know, straight to the ground, it still created this kind of ditch. So that was another reason I decided to revert back to concrete tracks, just to avoid that problem, because what I had to then do was put down some ploppable surfaces, which you've seen me lay down in the beginning of the episode, and try and cover up that ditch. But the problem with that is it just gave me so many issues, and I decided to try and simplify everything a little bit more. What I'm doing here, first of all, is I put these turntables in for the railway lines, and then I put these big curving train sheds down, which I wanted to really wanted to use these in the build. And here you can see the issue with the rail line there that I mentioned. So I think in a minute I'm going to start changing the tracks. There we go, changing the tracks back to a concrete sleeper. But at least now you can actually see the railway line, which I think is the better option. So once I've got those big trade sheds in, as I say, I wanted to get those down because they're kind of the main, well, one of the main landmarks, I guess, of the build. Then I could start working out some of the other areas. Now, with a rail yard of that period, you're going to have a lot of sort of older style brick warehouses, not so many sort of obviously modern buildings. This little chimney here, or this building, is actually a power plant, I believe, little diesel power plant. And actually also these sheds were not German, or certainly not of that era either. So there's a few buildings I was using at this stage that I was starting to think maybe I should try and either disguise them somehow, which is why I ended up putting some sort of brick walls around them, or just somehow camouflage the fact that they might be more modern than they actually should be for the build. But anyway, more about the chimney a bit later in this video. What I also did, because with rail yards, and particularly this map, is put some fences down, because it helps to first of all break up the scale of the map. Because when I got this, first of all, I kind of imported the outline of the build into City Skylines, and I thought, oh, it's not too bad. I'll probably spend a couple of hours building the rail yard. But then I quickly realised when I started putting some roads and railway lines and things down that actually the map is enormous. It's massive. So it took me a lot longer to do this build than I was imagining. But I think you can be caught out sometimes by this game. The amount of detail that you have to kind of factor in, especially for these large areas, because you don't want it just to look sort of half finished or sort of, I guess, empty. It needs to look as close as it can to being a kind of working, functional industrial area. So there was a lot more, let's just say, than I was expecting when I initially opened the map. But saying that, I was pleased that it was such a big build, because it did give me a lot of freedom, and it did allow me to put some of these bigger builds in, or bigger buildings in, just to kind of fill out the area. But there's still a lot of detail that I went to in terms of making sure things were looking detailed, let's say, particularly this little timber yard here, which I went to great lengths to put down sort of individual planks of wood and stuff. And I wasn't doing this on the whole area, but I think if you just focus on certain parts of your big build, if you're doing a big build, then that can help, I think. And as I say, it's not something I do for the whole thing, because it would just take forever. But for certain areas, it just works well. Now, this is the chimney camouflaging now, because that sort of more modern chimney was kind of bugging me a little bit. So I decided to put a brick chimney around it, put a ploppable surface around that, and then job done. And these little kind of warehouses and things, and just again, it's all about filling the area and trying to make it look like it's a functioning rail yard. what I also ended up doing on this part of the map was putting down what appear to be kind of little apartments or something like that. And I thought maybe that could be where some of the workers lived, like little kind of dormitories, those sort of buildings. So I did end up putting a few slightly more unusual parts into the Railyard. But as I say, because it's such a big map, then I don't think it necessarily mattered that it's not just all industry. You can have other sort of elements in your build. These little sheds, which I think may be kind of barns or something, but they fitted quite well with the theme. And really just a question of sort of making sure that you fill up your empty spaces. That was something I was aware of. I didn't want to just leave areas kind of redundant. And even if that meant just putting a fence around them and then just giving it the impression that it might be a sort of an old abandoned part of the plot there, at least then it gives it a degree of kind of detail without having to just add lots and lots of assets. I mean, that was something I was aware of. I didn't want to just end up with a huge number of props and assets, which I think I probably put down enough, to be honest, and maybe in hindsight I put down a little bit too many. But you know, if the Phoenician decides that he wants to reduce the number of the assets and things down, then that's entirely up to him. I'm not precious about the build. I think it shows what I had in my mind, but if he wants to simplify it a little bit and edit it a little bit, then that's absolutely fine. But hopefully this shows the kind of the vibe that I was trying to get. The other thing with these little fenced areas here, sometimes you put them down, I don't really know what I'm doing, I just put a fence down and see what happens really, but this kind of made it, or lent itself to becoming a little kind of cargo yard. Now the thing is with these sort of areas, if it was in today's world, then you'd have loads of shipping containers and things there, but of course back in the 1920s era, then shipping containers didn't exist. So I thought, well, probably what they would just have is a load of raw material there, like iron and steel and stuff, that would then just be put on the back of lorries and trains and things. So there's no actual modern contemporary sort of shipping containers or anything like that. And even from the point of view of cranes, I was aware that I couldn't really put any cranes down because I couldn't find any that looked like they were particularly of that era. So it's a little bit limited, let's say, in terms of what you can do in your build to make it authentically historical. And I do have a lot of respect for the Phoenician, because somehow he manages to make his episodes in his Berlin Noir series look very authentic, I think, which is not easy when you're dealing with a limited number of historical props. And the same goes for these train wagons as well. They're not necessarily correct to the period, but I felt because they were quite sort of just generic in a way, that they kind of work there. I think they look quite good, and I think you need to have some wagons and things. It is a rail yard at the end of the day. This is a kind of coal hopper, which I think is to refuel the locomotives. So that was again quite a nice sort of landmark structure to put in. And this little water tower here on this side, which again is another little sort of landmark. So I wanted to put a few kind of key landmark elements into the build. I didn't want it to just look like loads of sort of old brick warehouses and cargo yards. I did want to have a few sort of nice landmark buildings, and this water tower particularly looks really cool in that spot, I think. Now this is the last build, I guess. Well, no, it's not actually the last build, but it's the last area to fill up in terms of sort of warehouses and things. I had this long space next to the wall there, and between the railway, and I found these very long warehouse buildings which seem to fit there quite nicely, and just add a few little props and things in as well just to finish it off. Yes, and then this is a big, I'm not sure what this building is, some kind of factory, but I kind of imagine this would be one of the main kind of, I don't know if it's a train shed or a kind of engineering building, something like that. And again, what I ended up doing is putting down some little barns and things, sawmill. I think these are sawmill buildings, because they kind of work there, I think, in that position. I don't know what any of these buildings are, but it just gives the impression of it being a kind of working site. I also found some little steam engines on the workshop, and forgive me, I haven't got the asset creator. I'll need to try and find out who made those, but they're really cool. And you can also add some ploppable steam into the mix as well, just to finish it all off. I think that looks really good. And then just adding some plants, bushes again. If you can put some weeds and things in, that always helps. The gasometers are obviously the main kind of landmark, I guess, for the Railyard, and I wondered initially just whether or not to put them in because they are particularly large, but I actually think they sort of settle in there quite nicely. And again, putting some lights down. I don't usually put lights in particularly in my cities, but I think for the Railyard it probably makes sense to do that, because I don't know if the Phoenician will be doing nighttime shots, so I wanted to make sure I had some lights in there. Also some train signals here. These also seem to fit the kind of era of the build, and some rubbish and bits and bobs like that. Always helps just to pad out your empty areas if you can put some bits of rubbish and stuff down. And the last part really of the build was just putting down the actual wagons and trains and things themselves, and then it really comes to life once you add those in. I used a train model, the BrvTV train, and that was the one the Phoenician recommended, and is a historically correct train to the era of the build. But again, I did cheat and put some more sort of contemporary wagons and things in. I just wanted to, fill out some of these empty tracks. But when I put the trains down, which you'll see in a minute, I also added again some ploppable steam, which is one of my favourite assets at the moment. Using those ploppable steam probably in the future on some of my builds. But that's really pretty much it. Sorry about the speed of video has been running. I managed to forget and left it on 50%, so I should have slowed it down a little bit. But hopefully it's giving you a bit of an insight into how I've built the Railyard. Do stick around till the end of the video, because there's a big cinematic section, and that really does show how the whole thing comes together, and I'm really pleased with the result, and I only hope the Phoenician's pleased as well. So I look forward to seeing it in his build, and I look forward to seeing hopefully some of you next time on my next episode, which will probably be one of my own cities, I dare say. But until then, I'll bid you farewell, and see you later.